The Walt Disney Company's live adaptation of The Little Mermaid is set for a box office flop. And as we continue to remind folks, Disney, unlike many other Hollywood studios, is doing things very differently these days. They have called everything back home. They are self-consuming all of their own products. And now, even major Hollywood trade publications like Deadline magazine and Anthony D'Alessandro, who we constantly quote here on Valiant Renegade for box office news, is trying to save Disney's butt by producing articles suggesting that The Little Mermaid still has a chance to break even. They've basically thrown in the towel that this movie is now a flop. And we're going to talk about all the details right now. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. Great to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and hit that little red subscribe button and turn it to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. So for The Little Mermaid, the numbers you're looking at on the screen right now are a bit out of date. The domestic box office is current through Tuesday's close, but the international numbers have yet to be updated from the weekend, although we do have some inkling based on other websites like Box Office Mojo. There was about a $10 million international haul on Monday, and I suspect on Tuesday, probably a little bit less, somewhere in the range of 8 to 9 million. So let's be generous at this point and say that through the close of the box office Tuesday, globally, that The Little Mermaid is somewhere between $215 and $220 million. This is a movie that came in with a $250 million budget, at least that we know of. And Disney is quite famous at this point, as we now know, for understating what was actually spent. In other words, the budgets that come out are just the budgets. That doesn't mean that is what Disney ultimately spent to complete the film. And more often than not in recent years, Disney has blown the budgets, sometimes by a bit and sometimes by quite a bit. This is a film, by all accounts, that really has to reach somewhere in the $800 million range at the global box office to actually cover its costs. And by costs, I mean if we assume just the $250 million budget was met on time and on budget, and another $150 million or so in global marketing. However, I suspect that figure for global marketing might have been higher, maybe significantly higher. We've seen Disney in the recent years have over-accelerated marketing budgets to films that they feel should overperform at the box office. We saw that with Wakanda Forever, when they effectively, according to sources, robbed the budget from Strange World, which nobody knew about, and flopped at the theater, to pass it off to Wakanda Forever that came out just a week or two later. I think the same thing may have happened here with The Little Mermaid. I think given some of the soft reception for the next big Disney film coming out from Pixar, that is to say Elemental, Disney may be robbing some of the budget from that film to try to support this film that's on your screen. The problem, of course, at this point is the fact that it is highly unlikely, increasingly unlikely, that Disney's The Little Mermaid remake here in 2023, the live action version, it's not going to hit that marker. It's not going to come anywhere close to 800 million. In fact, at this point, I think The Little Mermaid would be damn lucky if it even sees $500 million at the global box office. See, the domestic box office at this point, while it's very soft, it's not anywhere near the problem they have in the international box office, which we covered in a previous video. The international box office opened at a paltry $68 million, while the domestic box office over the 4-day Memorial weekend, well, it opened at almost $120 million. Actually, not even quite 120. It came in under even Disney's low-end projections at about 118. And as it stands right now, the entire Pacific Rim seems off the table for The Little Mermaid. Now, we've covered this news previously on the Sunday Live show here on Valiant Renegade, and nothing seems to be changing. And quite frankly, we always do things here by the numbers, by business. It doesn't matter what the excuses are. We just look at this from a financial perspective. And as we suspected coming into this film, the casting decisions in this movie, and quite frankly, the runtime of this film, nearly an hour longer than its original version in 1989, was going to cause problems, and sure enough, it did. Big films like this with $200+ million budgets, these are global enterprises. And if you don't understand the global market going into this, that's a failure on the part of the business, or in this case, the distributor who is putting this movie out. Disney should have known better. They have been dealing with stuff in the Pacific Rim, particularly in China now, for almost a decade. We have seen what Disney has done with posters for things like Star Wars: The Force Awakens by shrinking characters in there who were not white. And I don't want to rehash what we've done in previous videos. You can go back and watch those again. But the all-critics score full of Disney pixie dusters at 68% doesn't really go into the details that the top critics do that frankly are not the paid Disney pixie dusters. That is a sharp 20% drop from 68 to 48%. And if you think that's bad, look at the audience scores. From the verified audience side, which frankly can be bought and paid for, versus the all-audience score of 57%, that is a shocking difference. Some might want to contend that none of that matters, but the fact remains that the box office speaks the loudest. The money is what talks, and the poop walks. And with a $168 million opening 3-day weekend, this movie underperformed radically from what it should have. I remind folks of things like Beauty and the Beast that opened up with almost $400 million globally back in 2017. Or how about The Lion King in 2019 that opened up with $450 million globally on its opening weekend. And people point to Aladdin at $212 million. That was even better than what The Little Mermaid did this past weekend, especially when you consider things like inflationary pressures, with Little Mermaid enjoying somewhere to the tune of 30% higher ticket prices than Aladdin did. But then there's this. Little Mermaid swimming against strong tides at overseas box office, leaving the break-even in question. This is from Deadline magazine today as I record this on Wednesday afternoon. In a rare situation for a Disney tentpole, particularly a live-action title based on a treasured classic animated musical, The Little Mermaid looks to bank more at the domestic box office ultimately than overseas. With $300 to $350 million, this is a projection, to $260 million abroad. While I love Deadline and Anthony D'Alessandro, I think those projections are going to be, frankly, rather generous over the course of time. The domestic box office has a chance of reaching $300 to $350 for sure. However, the international box office projections of $260 in his article seem to me, frankly, a little bit stunning. With a $68 million opening, we're literally talking about a 4x run on the international box office. I find this highly unlikely. And I know he's factoring in things like a delayed release in Japan, but quite frankly, considering the reception in places like China and South Korea to this film, I don't think Japan is going to be terribly far off the mark. And what I want to remind folks of is that Japan, Korea, and China, those were the three largest international markets by a long shot for things like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, and even Aladdin. Per the finance sources, offer reported $250 million production cost and $140 million global marketing spend. They think The Little Mermaid could very well break even. However, anything in the low 400 million global threshold, and this fish is apt to be sinking to a loss of around $20 million. So a couple of things right there. Anthony D'Alessandro and Deadline magazine are admitting that this picture could actually finish in the low to mid 400 millions globally. And here's why. There's a ton of competition that's about to smash this picture. And that is to say, the Sony picture, Miles Morales and Into the Spider-Verse, that's going to consume about half of Little Mermaid's PLF, or premium large format screens here, in just about a day. And then we've got Transformers coming out. Although Transformers is not going to be a massive domestic box office haul, it is going to cut in heavily to an already significantly depressed Little Mermaid international box office haul. And if we're looking for more evidence to back up what Deadline is angling towards in their article, look no further than the recent weekend predictions from Box Office Pro. This weekend, with Miles Morales Across the Spider-Verse opening up to a projected $110 to $120 million domestic open, they've got The Little Mermaid dropping back over 60% from its 3-day open, all the way down to $37 million this weekend. That means The Little Mermaid won't even finish at the $200 million domestic cumulative mark by the end of its second weekend, the end of its 10th day in theaters. Now, if we also consider how much further behind the international market is from the domestic market, if Little Mermaid is projected to do $37 million domestically in its second weekend, you can probably imagine that the second weekend internationally is going to come in somewhere around $20 million. If that actually comes to fruition, that's going to put the end run of The Little Mermaid somewhere at or below a $500 million global haul mark by the time it leaves the theater, because frankly, there's just too much competition coming in at this point. Again, the slowdown with The Little Mermaid, despite a strong start stateside, that's debatable, of $118 million over the 4-day Memorial Day holiday, and a running total through yesterday of $130 million, stems from the backlash the pick has received in certain offshore markets, Korea, China, France, Germany, over the casting of star Halle Bailey in the title role, as well as, quote, review bombing. Now, we've already covered this on the live show. The real review bombing is in the critic score and the verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with that review bombing dragging the picture up, not down. Review bombing goes both ways, but the media never seems to want to admit this. And yes, Hollywood studios can actually go out there and hire third-party marketing arms to fabricate reviews on these websites. So this whole notion that everybody's negatively review bombing, and that's the only way that review bombing can actually go, is just folly. It's just simply not the case. And the box office at this point bears it out. If you want a good counter-example to this, look no further than Super Mario Brothers. The critic scores for this movie coming into play was somewhere in the 50% range on Rotten Tomatoes, and yet nobody cared, because the hype and excitement for this film was so much so that it opened to nearly $400 million on its opening 5 days. It hit $500 million within the first week. And at this point, the reality is The Little Mermaid from the Walt Disney Company will be damn lucky to hit $500 million over its entire run. In a break-even scenario off a $560 million global box office, which is highly unlikely in my opinion, we're told The Little Mermaid's global film revenues would amount to $547 million against its combined production, global and theatrical, and home entertainment marketing expenses of $476 million. The PIC's revenues broken down include $267 million in global theatrical film rentals. So let's stop right there. They're assuming off of a $560 million projected final run for The Little Mermaid in a global haul that $267 million of that would come home to Disney. That's a figure that I can relatively well agree with based on financial metrics that we know. And bear in mind, that is only $17 million more than the actual production cost of this film. That has no accounting for the 150 plus, if not closer to $200 million marketing campaign that Disney may have engaged in at this point. Deadline also assumes, and this is where it gets really ridiculous, $100 million in net domestic pay and free TV, and what Disney pays itself to put the movie on Disney Plus. $100 million in global home entertainment, DVD and digital, that would be PVOD as well, and $80 million in international TV and streaming. Yeah, let's go ahead and stop right there because this is where the article goes into full BS mode. I'm sorry, I am done at this point. I understand that Deadline has their traditional historical metrics and accounting systems they've used for movies pre-pandemic. We are not in the pre-pandemic era. And what has changed, especially for companies like Disney, is that they self-consume all of their own products. And Disney Plus has a massive global footprint. Quite frankly, they have a bigger global footprint than even Netflix. In other words, what Deadline is assuming in this article is that this movie will profit only because Disney will pay itself. Yes, Disney will pay itself, according to this article, $100 million for its own distribution rights to its own film to put on Disney Plus, and another $80 million for its international distribution rights. Remember, Disney Plus is available in nearly every major international market on planet Earth. Where else is this movie going to go? Bob Iger and Christine McCarthy even said on recent earnings calls, making it abundantly clear that while they would cut back on the content on Disney Plus and license things out to third parties, that they would still keep their own core proprietary IPs in-house. Things like Pixar, things like Walt Disney Animation Studios, things like Little Mermaid, things like Marvel and Lucasfilm. Yes, those are all going to stay home on Disney Plus. So simply moving a $20 bill from the right pocket to the left pocket is fugazi. It's fake. It's nonsense. It's an accounting trick. They're going to claim the losses somewhere else. So in reality, The Little Mermaid, no, is not going to make any money. It's going to cost Disney. Disney is probably going to lose north of $100 million on this movie at this point, if not perhaps substantially more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you seen this movie? Are you going to see this movie? Do you even care about this movie? And make sure you check out the video on WDW Pro's channel here in just a few minutes, or maybe by the time you watch this video, it's already out. He's going to have another discussion on this very same topic with some great panelists on there, and I'd appreciate if you go hit up his video, let him know we sent you. Until next time, take care.